All right, my friends, welcome back. I'm Danny, and of course, this is Silent Motive, where we explore the strange, the unsettling, and the chilling mysteries that just don't quit. On today's episode, we are going to talk about Aileen Wuornos, or the Damsel of Death. Before we get too deep into it, don't forget to give us a like, follow, share, subscribe, or even a rating wherever you are getting your weekly dose of Silent Motive. And don't forget to turn your notifications on so you never miss an episode. Now go ahead and make yourself a delicious drink and settle in, because this one is, of course, a wild ride and you do not want to get caught with your pants down. Before we get started, this case, of course, is a rough one. This is your content warning. All the warnings I can warn you to be warned. Proceed with caution. I killed those men. Robbed them as cold as ice. And I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. Aileen Carol Wuornos, probably the most infamous female serial killer of all time. Hollywood made a movie about her, documenting her life, documenting her final days before she was executed for the crimes that she was found guilty of. Aileen was born February 29th, 1956, in Detroit, Michigan. Her mom, Diane Wuornos, was 14 years old when she married Aileen's dad, Leo Pittman. 2 years into the marriage, Aileen was born. She did have an older brother, Keith, shortly after Diane filed for divorce. Diane had Aileen at 16 years old. So let's just dissect that really quick. This is already a fucking nightmare. Let's be real. This situation was a disaster from the beginning. Aileen's dad was out of the picture before she was even born. Aileen never had her dad. She never met her dad. Leo Pittman, who was in prison for kidnapping, raping, and murdering a 7-year-old girl. He was diagnosed while in prison with having schizophrenia, and he ultimately committed suicide in 1969. Short story for old Leo there. Diane decided that she didn't want to be a mom anymore, and she dropped Keith and Aileen on her parents' doorstep when Aileen was around 4 years old. Big shocker here, Grandpa and Grandma were alcoholics. So again, not the best start for little Aileen. But wait, it continues. So some of the people that Aileen grew up with, friends, said that her grandpa beat her. Aileen stated that he would strip her naked and beat her. Aileen said that he also sexually assaulted her. Aileen was also engaging in sexual activities with Keith, her brother. By the age of 11 years old, Aileen was engaging in sexual activities in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, beer, money, and sadly, for food. By the time Aileen was only 14 years old, she was pregnant and she gave birth to her only child that was rumored to have been the result of an encounter with her grandpa's adult friend who was 60 fucking years old. Aileen gave birth to this baby in a home for unwed mothers in 1971, and her grandpa forced her to place this baby up for adoption. Probably for the best, but this would be the beginning of her separating herself from her family as much as she could. Aileen would go on to drop out of school a few months after she had her son. Her grandma had died from liver failure, and her grandpa threw her out of the house. Aileen was living in the woods. She was hitchhiking around the country under an alias, just trying to survive. So her life moves pretty fast. In 1974, at the ripe age of 18, she was arrested in Colorado. This arrest would just be the tip of the iceberg for Aileen and her run-ins with police. Aileen was arrested for a DUI, disorderly conduct, and firing a pistol from a moving vehicle. Bitch be wildin'. She didn't show up for her trial and got an additional charge of failure to appear. Now fast forward 2 years to 1976, where Aileen was hitchhiking to Florida, and she met a 69-year-old yacht club president, Louis Gratz Fell. But why is he interested in her? By this time, Aileen was definitely prostituting for money and whatever else she needed, so it's clear why she pursued him. But why is this random ass yacht club president hanging out with a prostitute or a sex worker? I don't know what the PC term is for them. Anyway, whatever. The two get married, which again is just random as fuck. Unfortunately for the newlywed couple, Aileen couldn't stay off the police radar. She was getting into fights at the local bars, and she was assaulting people. One of those people was her hubby, who she assaulted with his own cane. Louis filed for a restraining order just weeks after they had gotten married. Aileen returned to her home state of Michigan, where she got arrested at a club for, yep, you guessed it, assault and disturbing the peace. Check this out. She threw a cue ball at the fucking bartender's head. She was fucking wild. She was crazy. So shortly after this arrest, Keith died from cancer, and Aileen got $10,000 from his life insurance. Aileen and Louis had the marriage annulled only 9 weeks after the initial nuptials, and Aileen kept on keeping on. Aileen got another DUI in August of 1976. Aileen ended up paying the fine with her life insurance money. She bought a new car, and then she wrecked that car shortly after she purchased it. All of the money that she got from the life insurance would be gone in 2 months' time. So this is a lot. One of these things is a lot for a person, but the fact that this has all happened to Aileen within the first 20 years of her life is just, well, it's sad to say the least. I mean, when someone is set up for failure, they really don't know any better. This person was doomed from conception, which is truly a shame. I believe that she never really had a chance to be a good person, partly because of the path she chose, yes, but mainly because of the influences that she had growing up, in addition to the amount of trauma that this woman endured. She had abandonment, there was physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. It's a lot for one person, let alone, more. It's crazy. That being said, the next part is probably not going to shock or surprise anyone. 2 years after her brother passed away, Aileen attempted suicide. She shot herself in the stomach. And this wasn't Eileen's first attempt at suicide. Between 14 years and 22 years old, Aileen would attempt at least 6 times. Moving back to Florida in May of 1981, Aileen would be arrested, and she actually did a stint in prison for an armed robbery charge. She took $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes. She must have had a weapon, or maybe she assaulted somebody during the incident that made it an armed robbery. I don't know. Aileen was released in 1983, but that didn't last long, as it usually doesn't, and was arrested again in 1984 for forged checks. By November 1985, she was named a suspect in a theft of a revolver gun and ammo. Not even 2 months later, Aileen would be arrested in Miami for stealing a car, resisting arrest, and obstruction. Aileen provided an ID to police that was actually for her aunt. While searching the vehicle, a revolver was found, as well as the ammo. In June of 1986, Aileen was detained by police because a quote-unquote companion, aka a John, a customer, accused her of pulling a gun on him and demanding $200. Now, to me, that sounds like they had a quote-unquote deal or an agreement that services would be exchanged for $200, and he was trying not to pay that. Aileen did have a gun under her passenger seat at the time of this incident, as well as ammo. So Aileen has been arrested about, 300 times at this point, and she's barely 30 years old. But in 1986, she would meet 24-year-old Tyria Moore in Daytona Beach, Florida, at a gay bar called Zodiac. It's already off to a bad start. Guys. This was her second relationship with a woman, and it lasted up until just before her final arrest in 1991. Tyria was a motel maid at the time, so money was pretty tight, but the two moved in together, and Aileen supported them on her prostitution earnings. The pair would also sell stolen items at pawn shops. It was later discovered that items that were being pawned belonged to the first victim, Richard Mallory. This was discovered because of Aileen's fingerprint that was taken while she was pawning these items. Now, between this time and her final arrest, Aileen and Tyria had a few run-ins with police where they were accused of assaulting people with beer bottles. This bitch was absolutely ruthless. Beating fucking old men with their own canes, beating people with beer bottles, she did not give a single fuck. So at this point, we are up to about 1988, 1989. Aileen has to have the shittiest possible life so far. A lot of shitty things done to her. She's done a lot of shitty things to people. She's been married and divorced. She's been to prison. She's working on the street in an extremely dangerous capacity. And she has this girlfriend. We're going to enter the homicidal stage, which didn't last too long, but damn was she efficient. Aileen actually went on to kill 7 men in a 12-month time period, and all of these men were between 40 and 65 years old. Now, the first victim, like I mentioned, was Richard Charles Mallory, who was born in October 1938 in Palm Harbor, Florida. So the following came from court documents. So December 1st, 1989, a deputy with Volusia County found an abandoned vehicle that belonged to Richard. His body was found December 13th, miles away in the woods. Richard had been shot multiple times and had 2 bullets in his left lung that caused internal bleeding, which was ultimately the cause of his death. Again, court documents here. Aileen had told Tyria on December 1st that she had shot and killed a man earlier that morning. Aileen told Tyria that she went through his stuff and kept some of it, but also got rid of some things. Aileen said she left his body in the woods and ditched his car near the beach. So Richard was 51 years old at the time of his death. In one account, Aileen stated that Richard had beat, raped, and sodomized her after they drove to a secluded area after agreeing to an exchange of quote-unquote services. Aileen said she told Richard to remove his clothing, and he only wanted to unzip his pants because he couldn't afford her price. Aileen began to get dressed when Richard placed a cord around her throat and told her that he would kill her, quote-unquote, like the other sluts I've done. Richard tied her to the steering wheel and proceeded to sexually assault her. After, Richard cleaned Aileen's blood off himself with rubbing alcohol and cleaned Aileen as well. After this was when the struggle ensued involving the firearm that ultimately killed Richard. Another account, Aileen said that she knew that he was going to rape her, so she shot him twice while he was sitting behind the steering wheel. At some point, Richard crawled out of the driver's seat and stood up. Aileen went around the car and shot him again, causing Richard to fall to the ground. Aileen shot him 2 more times and then went through his pockets. Aileen said that she killed him in self-defense. It didn't come out until later because they don't ever like to speak the truth about these quote-unquote victims. But Richard had previously been convicted of attempted rape. I'm shocked. So, based on the information at hand, it doesn't seem like old Dick here was that great of a guy to begin with. Richard served time in a correctional institution from 1958 to 1962 to quote-unquote receive treatment. According to reports from 1961, so while he was incarcerated, it was documented that Richard showed strong sociopathic tendencies. Now, I'm not saying that murder is okay, but there's probably a lot that happened that night that he was murdered that wasn't necessarily allowed into court at the time that Aileen was on trial.
And you can't rehabilitate somebody who commits rape. Just my opinion.
All right, so next victim of Aileen, David Andrew Spears. He was born July 20th, 1942 in York, Kentucky. David was 43 years old when he was found naked and dead on June 1st, 1990. David was shot 6 times with a .22 pistol, and it took them an additional week to identify him through dental records. It was discovered that he had been missing since May 19th. Aileen stated that David got aggressive with her and tried to rape her, and she shot him in self-defense. The issues that came up during the trial was that he was robbed and his personal belongings were missing, and some were pawned by Aileen. This was the prosecution's arguments against the self-defense, saying that this crime was definitely financially motivated. I think a lot of this line of thinking just goes back to her fight or flight, but also her mental health concerns. Her childhood and being a sex worker so young, surviving is not something that's guaranteed. So frankly, I'm not surprised that she took whatever these men had on them at the time that she committed these murders. On the flip side, she was a very angry woman and she did not like men. So by the time that David is being identified, another naked dude is found a handful of miles away on June 6th, 1990. So he's naked, decomposing terribly in the Florida summer swamps, and his body is full of .22 caliber shots. With these factors at hand, this of course led them to believe that the 2 victims were likely killed by the same person. This body would be identified as 40-year-old Charles Carskaddon? 40-year-old Charles Carskaddon. We're going to go with that. Charles was a part-time rodeo worker who had been shot 9 times. His body was found wrapped in an electric blanket. Oh my God, gross. Gross. Of course, the circumstances were similar. Aileen met up with Charles for sex, and she said the same thing happened. He became aggressive with her and was threatening. Which, let's fucking be real here. It's the 1990s. She's a sex worker. Again, I don't know if that's the proper term. And so the reality is, they probably were aggressive. Her whole life, they were probably aggressive towards her and wanted the sex and didn't want to pay her. So the truth is that she probably was not far off when she's telling these stories. She had finally got sick of it. So Aileen said she believed he would rape her or seriously hurt her, so she shot him in self-defense. One thing that she didn't ever portray in these incidents was something that was premeditated, but rather a split-second survival decision. Aileen, of course, robbed him and stole his vehicle. Now, I would say that the robbing and the stealing of the vehicle, that's definitely a premeditated thing. That's a planned thing, but I don't know that she necessarily planned on killing these men. I don't know. Anyway, people saw Aileen driving his car. Aileen pawned a gun that belonged to Charles. I think, again, it's the 90s. She's a sex worker. People weren't exactly paying attention to her, so she figured that she was getting away with these murders. She needed money, she needed transportation, so she figured, why the hell not? I don't know if she killed them and then moved on in her brain, or if it hung over her like a cloud and was a concern for her. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. So up until this point, police have no leads. Then there's a break in the string of murders. July 4th, 1990, Aileen is with her girlfriend, Tyria, and they get into a car accident during an argument. They ditch the car, police find it, and then they realize that it's registered to a missing 65-year-old retired merchant seaman, Peter Siems. He was last seen June 7th, 1990, on his way to Arkansas. When police were processing the vehicle, they noticed signs of a struggle inside with a ton of finger and palm prints. A description of two women matching Aileen and Tyria was given to police as being seen leaving the vehicle. I really hope that that description had something to do with their teeth, because damn, those things were there. So Peter's body was never found. Aileen, however, did admit to shooting him. The circumstances of this case were the same as the others. He picked her up for sex, he got aggressive, and she shot him in self-defense. But because there was never a body found, they couldn't confirm anything that Aileen said happened, so her story would change throughout the course of this investigation. She never provided any information on where his body was or what happened to it. There was never any evidence to measure her story against. But it was probably eaten by like a crocodile or an alligator. It was, Florida. Alright, so on to the next victim, Troy Burress. Or Burress? I don't know. Troy was a sausage salesman, a truck driver, and he drove a route that he had probably drove 100 times before. Troy went missing July 31st, 1990, and his body was found August 4th. Troy was shot twice. Troy was found by a family that was having a picnic. Yikes. Aileen said that she met Troy while she was, of course, hitchhiking. He picked her up, and at some point she shot him. Aileen dumped his body in a wooded area just off the road. It was the same story that she had stuck to with all the others, self-defense. By this point, Aileen had created such a pattern that, of course, she was bound to get caught, especially with the time frame. One after another in such a short amount of time, and she is doing the same exact thing. Her MO is the same every time. So at this point, while I'm researching and looking into who these people were, I'm wondering to myself, do they have families? Do they have wives? So Richard looks like he may have had a family, but it's unknown if he had wife or kids. David had a family with children. Great, good job getting involved with a sex worker when you have a family at home. Great work, David. Charles also had a family. Good job, Charles. Not a whole lot about these personal lives because the story is obviously about Aileen being such a substantial figure with being the most infamous woman serial killer, but still, what the actual fuck were these men doing? But again, it's the 1990s. So we're on to our next victim. Charles Richard Dick Humphreys. That's ironic. The first victim and him just switched their first and middle names. But both are dicks, am I right? I'm kidding, but not really. Anyway, so September 11th, 1990, Charles was a 56-year-old man when he met Aileen. This one's a little bit disappointing to me. Charles was a retired U.S. Air Force major, a former child abuse investigator, and a former chief of police.
Come on, Charles. Do better.
Again, Aileen was hitchhiking along the road and Charles picked her up. Now, I guess there is a potential that he was just trying to help her get to where she was going, and she killed him and claimed it was self-defense. Aileen accused him of attempting to rape her, so she shot him. The issue that I have with this case, as well as Peter's, is she stole their car afterwards and she continued to use it. But Again, she doesn't think like a normal processing human does, so ultimately, Charles's case would just contribute towards her pattern that she had established and was going strong with. Charles' body was found a day after he met Aileen, fully clothed, shot 7 times in his head and torso. So the last and final victim of Aileen Wuornos would be Walter Gino Antonio. He was a 61-year-old trucker, security guard, and reserve police officer. Walter would be found on November 19th, 1990, almost completely nude, shot 4 times. 5 days after he was found, his car was found in a different county. So between 1989 and 1990, Aileen managed to kill 7 men. Most of them picked her up and allowed her into their car with the probable assumption that they were going to engage in some type of sexual exchange. All of them drove to secluded areas in the woods. All of them, except for Peter, possibly because of the lack of body, were all shot and robbed by Aileen. So I would like to know how much Tyria knew about all of this. How much involvement did she have? With police investigating each crime and murder, they began to process fingerprints from the vehicles that were abandoned. So like I mentioned, July 4th, Aileen and Tyria had crashed one of the cars that Aileen had stole. A witness to the crash, Rhonda Bailey, is the person who saw the 2 women exit the vehicle, and she provided that description to police. It had to involve the teeth. It had to involve their teeth. Like, I don't know, if you've seen the documentary, you know what I'm talking about. This would spark a media release later down the road. Police began checking pawn shops and located victims' belongings being pawned by Aileen. So, with the fingerprints being taken from the vehicles, one of them matched in whatever system Florida had been using for criminal records at the time. It also matched a print provided on a receipt from a pawn shop. Aileen was committing crimes where she had always been committing crimes, in Florida, so naturally they had her fingerprints on file, and of course she became the prime suspect. At some point, Aileen and Tyria split up, as in Tyria decides to go to Pennsylvania, where her family and friends are, and police realize that Aileen isn't probably acting alone. They were able to isolate Tyria from Aileen and convince her to work with them to get Aileen to confess. Tyria was brought in for questioning by police, and of course she agrees to cooperate. Tyria agrees to make recorded phone calls with Aileen, speaking about the murders and the robberies. So Tyria left Aileen in Florida, and she calls her on the phone and basically says, "Look, the police know. They know it's you." And she's pleading with Aileen to just come clean about the crimes. Tyria made Aileen believe that she was in trouble and wanted Aileen to just tell her the truth, and told her that maybe things would be better if she just came clean. Initially, Aileen was emotional and vulnerable in these recorded phone calls with Tyria. Aileen was admitting to the involvement in the murders. She wasn't denying the crimes, but rather trying to justify why they happened the way that they did. Aileen said the same thing over and over, that they tried to hurt her and she had to protect herself. These calls became crucial in the investigations. It proved that Aileen would speak with Tyria in a way she likely wouldn't speak with police. And at some point in the phone calls, she went from a very guarded tone to just plain resignation. She went from denial of what she did and why she did it to the acceptance that she would likely be caught. What Aileen didn't know at the time of these calls was that Tyria was being given immunity if she agreed to work with police to elicit a confession from Aileen. Tyria wouldn't be charged if she provided what they needed. So on January 9th, 1991, Aileen would be arrested at the last resort biker bar in Volusia County, Florida. I don't know if Volusia, I don't know, Florida. She was arrested in Florida. The police told her the arrest was for a warrant for carrying a concealed weapon under one of her alias names. What authorities didn't tell her was she was the suspect in 6, soon to be 7, murders at that time. With all of the evidence piling up against her, including witness testimony and fingerprints tying her to the victims and their belongings, it wouldn't be long before Aileen knew that she was caught. On January 16th, 1991, Aileen would confess to the murders. That's a quick fucking turnaround. Damn. Her story remained the same. It was self-defense. They were aggressive and they tried to rape her. The thing that didn't remain consistent was her demeanor. Aileen would change from defensive and guarded early on and go to angry and confrontational. If she was challenged, she would challenge right back. When Aileen was talking about her past or being in fear, she would be emotional and vulnerable, but the odd part? When she would describe the killings, she would be very calm and matter-of-fact. Most of the time, interrogations and interviews with suspects are more intense, but dealing with someone who has the trauma and the history that she had, I bet this shit was just crazy wild. It's said that the interviewers weren't just intimidating, but they were patient and they let her talk, which is a great interviewing technique. After she provided a narrative on what happened, when and why, they presented her with the evidence. They told her about the fingerprints, the cars they knew she stole, and the calls with Tyria. Aileen did admit to the murders, but kept that it was a self-defense claim. Aileen told police they were trying to assault her. She at no point ever denied shooting them, but her main focus was on why she killed them. When she would describe the possible rapes, she would be emotional, but then she would switch to very calm, detached tone when she spoke about the violence that she inflicted. One of the most emotional things for Aileen would be finding out that Tyria was in on it. Knowing that Tyria cooperated to help her get caught, this made Aileen feel isolated and she felt exposed. After all this hit the news, a woman, Arlene Arlene, decided that she was going to adopt Aileen. The two did not know each other before any of this went on, but they did form a bond, and the adoption was final in November of 1991. Weird. In January 1992, a year after her arrest, Aileen went on trial for the murder of Richard Mallory, or the first victim. And I say victim loosely because he's got his own fucking issues. So typically, previous convictions aren't allowed in criminal trials, but the prosecution was able to introduce evidence related to her other crimes to show her pattern of illegal activity, which frankly, that's kind of fucked. They didn't bring up the fact that Richard was convicted of attempted rape in the 1960s. Not sure how that's a fair trial, but whatever. There were, 6 other men that she killed, but it is what it is. The prosecution went on record saying they believed this was not self-defense, but a pattern of calculated murders. The physical evidence that was present ranged from ballistics and crime scene details to her confessions made during the interrogation. This showed that she would lure men in, kill them, and rob them. They stated it wasn't survival, it was robbery and murder committed 7 times. The defense leaned heavily on her self-defense claim and her past trauma. They argued, saying she had a history of abuse and trauma and she had to survive in the sex work field. They said that Aileen believed she was in danger in those circumstances and that the situations, they just escalated. Aileen wasn't hurting men, she was reacting to threats. When Aileen took the stand, she was anything but a typical defendant. She was intense, emotional, and sometimes unpredictable. But that's consistent with the whole story. If we can count on Aileen for anything, it's inconsistency. Some people observing saw this as a traumatized and reactive woman. Some saw this as an unstable and not credible person. The reality was, it was probably a combination of all of the above. She probably had some serious mental health diagnoses that were not being treated. Not that that would have mattered. Aileen was convicted of first-degree murder and armed robbery with a firearm on January 27, 1992. The sentencing phase began the following day and would last 4 days. Aileen was sentenced to the death penalty. After she pled no contest, which is essentially guilty, to the remaining murders, she would receive multiple death sentences. Aileen said she just wanted to quote-unquote get right with God. In her statement to the court, she said, quote, "I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I've told you, but these others did not. They only began to start to," end quote. In total, Aileen would receive 6 death sentences. Aileen was evaluated by 3 different psychologists, all of which diagnosed her as having borderline personality disorder at the time of her crimes. Oh, there you go. There you have it. Undiagnosed mental illness. There was also speculation that she had suffered brain damage. One of the doctors stated that Aileen believed that she was in imminent danger at the time of the murder, and the remorse that she showed revealed that she didn't suffer from an antisocial personality disorder. The expert for the state said she did have an antisocial personality disorder. Now, I'm no expert, but I definitely believe that she did have some traits of both borderline and antisocial personality disorders. But honestly, what did the world expect? She wasn't wanted from the very beginning. She was thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect her and help her grow into something. She was never given a fair shot at anything. I'm not trying to justify what she did, but damn was she fucked. Aileen was incarcerated at Florida State Prison in 1992. She tried to appeal the death row sentencing in 1996, but it was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. In an interview for a documentary with Nick Broomfield, Aileen believed the cameras were shut off, and she stated that all of her killings were in self-defense, but she couldn't stand being on death row. She just wanted to die. In 2001, Aileen petitioned the Florida Supreme Court and informed them that she had dismissed her attorneys and wanted to terminate all of her pending trials. Aileen said, "I killed those men," she wrote, "robbed them, cold as ice, and I'd do it again. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything because I'd kill again. I have hate crawling through my system. I am so sick of hearing this 'she's crazy' stuff. I've been evaluated so many times. I'm competent, sane, and I'm telling the truth. I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." Before her execution, she lived in isolation. She did do interviews with reporters and filmmakers, but unfortunately, her mental state just got worse with time. Aileen became more paranoid, erratic, and she was convinced that there were conspiracies against her. Aileen believed people were tainting her food with dirt, saliva, and urine. She began hearing voices that were trying to push her to the point of committing suicide before her execution. Aileen stated that she wasn't being treated fairly while incarcerated. She stated that she was being strip searched, which happens anytime that they return to the unit, so that's pretty typical. But the handcuffing was too tight. They would come by and kick her doors. The window checks were excessive, which again, if she is in a cell for 23 hours of the day, that is pretty normal to check to see if anyone is self-harming. I only know that from working in the prison. She stated that their water pressure was low, she had a moldy mattress, and that they would catcall her and had just a general hatred towards her. But Aileen would threaten to boycott showers and eating, and then turn around and say that they were not allowing her to shower and weren't bringing her food. This is possible. I mean, it could be either way. Ultimately, Aileen requested that her execution date be moved up. In her final interview, she said that she was being tortured and her head was being crushed by sonic pressure, so she was probably schizophrenic or schizoaffective. She told the interviewer, "You sabotaged my ass. Society and the cops and the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit." Her final on-camera words were,
"Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass."
Her friend from childhood clarified that she meant the words towards society, not towards the interviewer specifically. On October 9th, 2002, Aileen was given a lethal dose of a cocktail including sodium thiopental, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride. She declined having a last meal and just had a cup of coffee. Her last words were, "Yes, I would like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." Aileen Carol Wuornos was the second woman in Florida to be executed and the 10th in the United States. So this shit was dark in every possible way. She had a shitty childhood and upbringing and a shitty adult life. It was just all around shit. That is it for this episode. Thank you guys for sticking around for another episode of Silent Motive. Remember, every silence has a motive. If you enjoyed this episode, like I mentioned before, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and follow us to enjoy new episodes when I'm able to put them out, where we dive into another modern mystery that blurs the lines between creepy and criminal. You can follow us on Instagram at silent_motive_pod, POD, and feel free to send me a message on there with episode recommendations, and I will do my best to getting around to them at some point. And if you want a specific case done, be sure to let me know if I can give you a shout out. Thanks, guys.